So many of you guys go to conferences. You see speakers speak at conferences, so you probably know the deal, right? That a lot of speakers repeat a lot of the same content, month after month, and sometimes year after year, right? Some of you know that, right? I'm not breaking the bubble for anyone. Today, that's not going to happen. And the reason that's not going to happen is not because I wanted to do a lot more work for this presentation, but it's because I couldn't. What we're going to talk about today is something I couldn't have talked about a year ago. It's something I couldn't have talked about 6 months ago, and it's something we couldn't have talked about 2 months ago. Today, we're going to be talking about how to use social media to communicate our message of good well. And the reason we couldn't have done that in this same way a few months ago is that we are right now in the middle of the worst year of social media's life. If you open the internet these days, you will see an article telling you why social media is bad for you, bad for your kid, and bad for your brain. And so today, our challenge as church leaders, as nonprofit leaders, as people who want to make a positive difference in the world, is to figure out how we can reclaim social media for good. How can we find the tools to effectively communicate messages of hope and good on these platforms? So I want to get started by going back and looking at how we got here. This is James Buck. In 2008, James Buck was a blogger and photojournalist at the University of California at Berkeley, my hometown. And he was studying for his master's thesis. He was doing a thesis looking at labor protests in Egypt. And in order to complete his master's thesis, he got on a plane and went to Egypt. And when he got off the plane in Cairo, his friend said, "Hey, James, there's this new platform called Twitter that has been really useful for journalists, and we think you should jump on and join." James said, sure. Didn't really know what he was doing. He had a couple dozen followers. The next week, he was outside a town called Mahala in Egypt covering one of these protests. He had flown to Egypt to cover, and he gets arrested. So he's in the back of the cop car, and he manages to send out one tweet. That tweet was the word arrested. Within hours, his several dozen people on Twitter had mobilized, got in touch with the ambassador, and he was freed. An incredible story in 2008, perhaps even more incredible today when we are facing the darkness that social media can bring. In 2008, this was not only incredible, but also surprising because no one thought that social media was there for this. This is an early sketch of the Twitter platform by one of the co-founders, Jack Dorsey. If you can see, he sort of had this vision that it would be a platform called Status, STAT.US, and you would be able to kind of put in tick boxes what you were doing. You were in bed, you were going to the park, you were going to a movie. Point being, it was an incredibly simple idea, an incredibly simple platform. And no one could envision that this could be used for that much at the time, right? Twitter in 2006 and 2007 was all about celebrities telling people what they had for breakfast. And so it was over the years that we started to see that, wow, these tools could actually be used for something much greater. This is an image from the island of Moldova. These are the protests in the summer of 2009 when I started working at Twitter. These protests were dubbed the Twitter Revolution because it was the first time that people had mobilized for political unrest over Twitter. This is an image from the Haiti earthquake. The Haiti earthquake in January 2010 was the first time that people understood that social media could also be used in disaster response. So we're seeing these incredible strides, right? We're going from breakfast to revolutions to disaster response. This is an image from the US Airways plane that went down in the Hudson River in 2010 as well. This image wasn't taken from a photographer from a big magazine or newspaper. It was taken by someone in one of the ferry boats that was diverted to pick up the passengers, the survivors. All of them were survivors of this plane crash. So this was an example showing us, okay, Twitter can not only be used for revolutions, Twitter can be used for disaster response, Twitter can also be used for breaking news. So these are all really, really positive examples, taking people very, very far on this journey from social media as something that we use to tell people what we're eating for breakfast, and social media as something that can make incredible change in the world. Now, that's not to say there weren't some detractors. Malcolm Gladwell came out with a famous article in around 2010 saying the revolution will not be tweeted. His argument, then as it is now, was essentially that social media is one tool, but revolutions are in the hands of individuals, which is an argument that I would agree with, that I came out vociferously in agreement with. But I also said, you know, a revolution can be tweeted, as we've seen in the past and as we would see in the future with the Arab Spring. So it was in this context of good, of positivity, of a few naysayers, but for the most part, a lot of examples of good doing, that we ran into 2017. This is one of the many articles that came out at the end of 2017, Silicon Valley's gut-wrenching year confronting its dark side. By the end of 2017, it was impossible to turn on the internet and read something about Twitter or Facebook that it didn't tell you why social media was bad in some way. In this article, I was quoted talking about how one of my books, I wrote a book years ago called Twitter for Good, Change the World One Tweet at a Time, was so well received when it came out, but now in 2017, 2018, I question if that could ever be published. What I said in this article, as I'll say now, is I wonder, are we in a world where all of a sudden it's Twitter for bad? 2 weeks ago, a new coalition started in Silicon Valley. It's called Time Well Spent, and it was started by some early employees at Facebook, the guy who developed the like button, and some other early employees at Google. And what this coalition aims to do is look at all the ways that the internet is hurting us, is hurting the way we live, is hurting the way our brains work, and is hurting our children. For the first time in a generation, suicide rates in adolescent girls are up. They've almost doubled in 5 years, and many people are theorizing that this has to do with social media. 58% of adolescent girls spend at least 2 hours a day on social media. And you and I, we are adults, and we still face the consequences of compare and despair, right? You go on a social media platform, you compare yourself to someone else, and then you despair. But imagine what it's like if you're not even a fully formed person yet, right? You're a 15-year-old girl looking at all the other kids that were invited to the party. Social media is changing our brains. It's not only changing our attention spans, but it's changing our confidence and the way we think about ourselves. This is Mark Zuckerberg following the news that it looked like Russia had truly, potentially meddled in the election using Facebook. He came out and apologized for the ways my work was used to divide people rather than bring us together. We've all heard a lot about fake news. We're really sick of it, but there's one thing about fake news that many of us should be realizing, and that is fake news isn't necessarily this big thing with Russian bots. It's also this thing called the silo effect, this thing called information bias, this thing where I go on Facebook and I think I'm becoming informed, but I'm actually just in my own silo of hearing the information I want to hear from the few people I follow. These are all very real things and very real realities when it comes to social media. And finally, we are struggling in the US, as we struggled in Argentina, my home country, a few years ago, with a leader who doesn't use the platform in a way that inspires. Theodore Roosevelt coined the term bully pulpit. At the time, bully was a term for an excellent pulpit, an excellent way to extend good to the world. But many people have questioned, do we have a leader in the US now who's using the platform, the Twitter platform, as as a way to say not nice things about people. So what do we do in this world, right? What do we do in a world like this where we want to do good? We want people to learn about Christ. We want people to donate to our powerful nonprofit to change the lives of orphans. But we have tools that people are saying are bad for us. And that's what we're going to talk about today. My new book, it's not finished writing yet, looks into a model for using social media for good, for reclaiming social media. And that's what I want to get into today. This is a model. We'll talk through it. It's 5 steps. And it is a hopeful way that people who want to make change can still make change on these platforms, using the good in your heart and the good that I believe remains in these tools. So to dive in, I want to tell you why Mark Cuban is not going to make you go viral. Last year, I spend a lot of my time writing books, I sometimes give talks, and I advise companies. And last year I was working with a company. They had this awesome app. I loved it. I totally thought it was going to change the world, but they had terrible marketing. And so they came to me because they had done a launch and it hadn't gone well. So it was one of those things where they'd done a launch and now they were calling it their beta because it hadn't gone well. So they were relaunching, so I spent a couple months on this intense strategic plan, and we finally had our big meeting to talk about the plan, right? And we sit down, and one of the co-founders says, wow, there's just so much information in this 50-page document. I don't even know where to start, right? Which sometimes is also code for he didn't read much of it. So I say, okay, let's start with point 1. So we start with point 1. And the other co-founder says, well, I think maybe this would be a great thing to do later on down the road. So then we move to point 2, and it's sort of more of the same. And then finally, one of the co-founders clears his throat, and it's clear that he's about to make his big point, right? This is what he's been gearing up for. And he says, you know what, Claire? I think that if we just got Mark Cuban to tweet about us, we would go viral. And then the other guy chimes in, yeah, I think that's a great idea. You've met Mark Cuban a few times, right, Claire? Can't you make that happen? Okay, how many of you think this startup still exists today? The reality is that people have this idea that social media is there to make us go viral, and then when we go viral, golden raindrops fall down from the clouds, right? I'm here to tell you that going viral is not a goal, and it's also usually not even effective. So what is social media for if it's not for making us go viral? I believe that social media is a cocktail party that you've got to go to. I'm an introvert, so that's kind of scary, so let's talk about what that means. You've got 5 invitations to cocktail parties this week. Unfortunately, to save face, your organization, your church, has to show up at one of them. Have to show up at one of them. Sorry, those are the rules of the game. Gotta show up at one of them. Now, ideally, when you show up, you should actually try to stand out. So what do you do to stand out at a cocktail party? The best thing you can do to stand out at a cocktail party, because there are other ways to stand out. You could walk in a bright red dress, you can drive a Vespa through the room and knock over some of the glasses, but the effective way to stand out at a cocktail party is to have a powerful, clear story. So the project, this book I'm working on it with my friends over at Story Brand. My friend Don Miller started this marketing agency called Story Brand. It's a fantastic organization. If you haven't read this book, it's a great place to start. It will tell you how to clarify your story so that people will listen to you. What Story Brand believes and what I believe is if you confuse, you lose, right? So our goal as individuals who have a message for good is to figure out what our story is and to clarify that story, and to do so on social media. So one of the ways you're going to do this on social media is you're going to open the story loop. So I don't want to tell you what that means. I'm gonna show you what that means. 11 years ago, I went to Kenya to climb a mountain. I had been traveling for a couple years. I had a really crappy online editing job that paid my bills, and I'd always had a dream of traveling around the world for a full year. So I convinced my best friend to go with me. We traveled around the world. It was an incredible experience. We climbed to the base camp of Mount Everest. We ran a marathon in Madrid. We did a whole lot of nothing on beaches in Thailand. And the last stop on this trip around the world was Kenya. We went to Kenya to climb a mountain. And someone suggested, when they heard that we were going to Kenya to climb Mount Kenya, that if we were going to Mount Kenya, we should really stay at this guest house they knew near the base of the mountain. So they hooked us up with this guest house, and when we showed up, we realized that the guest house was actually owned by an orphanage. Now, I'm a Christian. I've always been a Christian, but I've never been in an orphanage before. And I was quite honestly scared of this. I didn't know what it would be like. I didn't know if I would feel uncomfortable with the kids. I didn't know what it would be like then when I left the kids at the end of the day. So we go into this orphanage, and the orphanage is owned by a church. It's on the grounds of a church, and so the elders invite us to a lunch in the rectory next to the orphanage before we go in and meet the kids. And so it was in the middle of that lunch that I asked to be excused. I was feeling a little weird, didn't know if it was indigestion, didn't know what was going on. I asked to be excused. I go to the restroom in the back of this church rectory, and there is this dirty old mirror hanging on the wall, and I have a moment that I have never had since, and I had never had before, where I feel God actually speaking to me. And I hear him say, or some version of this, "Open your eyes so that you can see." Okay, does anybody have a paleo donut? Do you even know what a paleo donut is? I'm paleo, so I love donuts, and I really miss not eating donuts as a paleo. So did you see what just happened there? You guys, as Christians, are probably theologically obligated to hear what happened when God told me what happened next, right? But I didn't tell you. I switched the conversation completely. I started talking about paleo donuts, which confused 90% of you. But you want to know what happened next. So that's opening a story loop. So for me, what happened next was I walked into that orphanage that day. I met a boy who became my foster son, who then came and did high school and university in the US. I lived in the orphanage for a year. I started a nonprofit. The way my nonprofit got off the ground was I started using a little tool called Twitter, and then that's how I ended up making my way out to Silicon Valley and becoming an early employee at Twitter. So that was my story. Now, there are different ways on social media to open the story loop and to tell that story. That was one way I could have done it, but maybe I could have done it with images. Maybe I could have done it with video, right? These are all examples of different types of content. I like to call them content envelopes, or your envelope system on social media, that you're going to send out there to consistently open the story loop about what you as a church and what you as an organization do. This is an image from Charity Water. They used to have this great feature, the photo of the day, and it was something that everyone always looked forward to, and it was a great way to just open the story loop on a daily basis. But this idea is you have different types of content, you're consistently opening the story loop. And then, occasionally, you're closing that loop. And when you close the loop, you're bringing someone up the engagement ladder, or down, you could say, the engagement ladder. So someone starts by following you on social media. They then progress to maybe liking something you do on social media, responding to something you do. They then progress to resharing it, retweeting it. They then maybe click on a link, end up on your website. They then maybe donate to your nonprofit. They then maybe show up at your church, right? That's the engagement ladder. And you're moving from a cocktail party to, intimate dinner, essentially, right? You're bringing someone down the engagement ladder as you consistently open the story loop. And this is dramatically different from randomly going viral. Now, I know there are a few people in this room that have heard all this, and they're like, yeah, but I'd still like to go viral. Okay, so for you, here's my next story. I went viral, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt, in my case, onesie. This is the homepage of yahoo.com on April 5th, 2014. This is the day I had my first child. That's me, that's my daughter. I went into labor 3 weeks early, and in the middle of the night, as one does, I Googled, did my water break? And then, as one does, I tweeted, Googling, did my water break? Over the course of the next 6 hours, our car broke down. We had to get a taxi. My husband, who was bringing his ukulele to the hospital, forgot his ukulele. And then I was tweeting the whole way. It went crazy, crazy viral. I, was on the homepage of all these magazines and newspapers in dozens of countries, Good Morning America, whatever. Conan O'Brien talked about it as opening dialogue. A Twitter employee live tweeted the birth of her child, which explains why the doctor kept yelling push and send. It was all these places, right? So what happened the day after I went viral? Does anyone have a guess? Nothing. Nothing. And what happens most of the time when people go viral? Nothing. I think the day after I went viral was the day that the wife of that Christian guy said she would never wear leggings again for religious reasons. Or maybe it was the day that the guy put the TV box on his snowplow and tried to plow the yard, right? This is what happens, and this is the reality. The vast majority of the time that people go viral, nothing happens. Because going viral shouldn't be a goal. So we've looked at this idea of story in the share model, right? The share model is 5 steps, S-H-A-R-E. S is story. Now I want to look into how you can really go about effectively sharing some of this message. And I'm not actually going to get into the nitty-gritty of the types of tools you can use, but I will give a shout out to my first phone that I was tweeting from. This was the phone I was tweeting from in Kenya in 2006. It had a little Bluetooth. It connected via Bluetooth dongle to my old clunky laptop. Point being, there are a lot of tools you can use. A lot of things will help you get there, right? But let's talk about something that I think a lot of people in the room will want to know, which is really who should be pressing that button. Who should be doing the tweeting? A lot of you guys work with leaders in your churches. You are leaders. Sometimes some of you are too tapped out to feel that you can actually do the sharing. So who should really be doing the work, right? So in 2012, I spent a year working with the Vatican to get the Pope on Twitter. This is me standing next to the Pope, and that's a Mexican journalist by his side. And the thing that people most asked me after this experience was, did he really press the button? And there's actually a video on YouTube of him pressing the button, and sadly it's like a 3-minute long video, because it was kind of like it took a little bit of time. But the point is, this is such a common question, but it's actually not as important as people think. So this is Barack Obama when he won the election in 2008. This is his account, the Barack Obama account, going out saying, we just made history. All of this happened because you gave your time, talent, and passion. All of this happened because of you. Thanks, right? Barack Obama in that campaign, as is known, that campaign was known for being, the first example of a real political election success on social media. So this is Barack Obama supposedly tweeting. Okay, here we go. This is the Haiti earthquake, January 2010. Barack Obama goes down to Haiti, visits the American Red Cross, apparently uses their Twitter account, and so they send out this tweet that says, President Obama pushed the button on the last tweet. It was his first ever tweet, right? So this is a year and a half after the other first tweet. This is a year and a half after that. Obama and Twitter, this is the co-founder of Twitter with Obama, do a Twitter town hall, and there Obama is actually pressing the button for the first time. The point being, during all those years, Obama was still very wildly effective on social media, even though he had a team behind him helping him, and even though it wasn't him necessarily pressing that little button. So I think that's something really important to remember. It's important to have a presence on social media, and it's important for your leader to have a presence, but it doesn't have to be that individual. So another thing that really matters when it comes to how you can go about sharing your story on social is remembering that it's all kind of a first draft. You know, a lot of times I will work with organizations and they will be getting ready with a new strategy on Facebook or Instagram, and they will become paranoid and, you know, almost kind of scared and immobilized by this thought of getting started, right? And so they come up with a draft, they pass it on to the PR person, the PR passes it on to the communications manager passes it on to the social media manager, right? It goes through so many steps. And so sometimes I think it's good to remember that it's all really a first draft. And I think there's a guy we can look to help us remember this. This is Kanye West. When Kanye West first got started on Twitter, this was about 6 years ago, I was working at the office one day and we get this email saying that Kanye West is coming in to send his first tweet. And so everyone gets excited and we all go into like the common area where there's coffee. And meanwhile, you know, we were waiting for him to send his first tweet, but actually I guess he'd already sent it in the like fancy car on the way over, and this was it. Up early in the morning, taking meetings in Silicon Valley, right? So everyone reads that and they're like, uh-oh, what's Kanye gonna do? How's he gonna get back from this? This is a big mistake, right? Next tweet. LOL, I spelled silicon wrong. I guess I was still thinking about the other type of silicone. It's a process. The internet, you know, starts going wild. Wow, Kanye's really turning this around. And then he just doesn't stop tweeting. I don't ever watch dramas on a plane. I don't be wanting to reflect. And this has gone on for years. I mean, I think I saw recently he was asking Bill Gates for $50 million because he says he's $50 million in debt. I mean, this is nuts. Ha, 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 140. My beautiful, dark, twisted fantasy. We all wish we knew what that was. Mosquitoes suck. The point is, we all need to remember a little Anne Lamott when it comes to using social media, right? It's all a first draft. You can usually recover from most things. So we've talked about story, we've talked about how to share that story. I now want to talk about audience, because it turns out social media isn't about you, it's about your audience. It's about the people who are following you. And there are two great ways to make sure the people following you know that it's about them. And one of those ways is to ask a question. This is a friend of Scott Williams. He's a pastor in Oklahoma City. And he used to have a feature on Twitter, this was years ago, where he would call it church roll call. And so he would say, let's get church roll call started. Where will you be attending church? Name, city, state, pastor, Twitter, etc. Use hashtag. And he would do this every Sunday. Must have done it for years. And it just is a great way to engage people, right? This is a tiny example of just why asking a question on any social media platform is an incredible way to get people responding and to make sure that they know that it's about them and not about you. Another great thing to do is to help somebody. This is Emily Rahimi. She's the social media manager for the fire department of New York. When Hurricane Sandy came through, she stayed glued to her desk for 24 hours, just answering people's queries, giving people support. She couldn't always necessarily help everybody from her position as social media manager in the office and not out in the field, but she was able to extend a hand. This makes a big, big difference. Another key way to help someone is to use a hashtag. Hashtags should not be thought of as little things. Hashtags are movements. Hashtags should be movements, and hashtags are a great way to build movements across multiple platforms. One of my favorite hashtags of all time, one of my favorite pictures of a hashtag of all time, this is after the Charlie Hebdo attacks in Paris. Hashtags are a really powerful thing for any organization to start using. And the thing I really say when it comes to a hashtag is you want to be wide enough to bring in new people, right? So I remember working with Catalyst Conference, the organization, years ago, and they used to always do this thing, which a lot of conferences do, thankfully not eChurch, hashtag eChurch Summit, where you kind of come up with a different hashtag for all your different events, right? Or a different hashtag for maybe all your different lecture series at the church. And that can be okay for organizing things, but it doesn't work for movement making. For movement making, the goal is really to come up with one great hashtag that over time you can build across platforms that can help get people who don't even know anything about you to come in and start following you and start seeing what you're all about. So, if you go to a Catalyst conference these days, you'll see that the hashtag is just hashtag Catalyst, because it's a great word and it's a movement word. And so that's really a powerful way to bring your audience together and to make it about them. So the next step in this model to reclaim social media for good is about reach. I think this is true. We'll see if you do. About 10 years ago, if you wanted to go down and find a celebrity, 15 years ago, if you wanted to find a celebrity in Beverly Hills, you could drive down. You could find one of those guys standing on a street corner with one of those maps of celebrity houses, and you could pay him $10, and then you could go start knocking door to door. There's probably some online version of phone numbers for this, right? But really, when Twitter started, it was the first time that you could technically contact any celebrity, right? And when I say this to people, sometimes they say, oh, well, they never write back, but that's not true. Again and again and again, what we see particularly with the platform of Twitter is that it's very much about reaching out to influencers and creating connections with the people that you think might be able to help take your organization to the next level. One of my favorite stories about this is a story about an organization called Global Citizen Year. They take 18-year-old high school grads in the US and they send them off to developing nations for a year of service work before starting college. So kind of a gap year for US kids who aren't as typically used to that term. Global Citizen Year is a program that my foster son did in Ecuador. It's a great organization. This is Abby Fallick. She's the founder of the organization. This is Nick Kristof, an author and columnist for the New York Times. Abby, when she first joined Twitter, she saw it as just sort of another way to push market her message out there, right? She didn't realize that it was really about relationships and about building those relationships over time. And so it was over the course of a few months that Abby started realizing, hey, maybe Twitter is good for something more than just pushing out my sales message for my nonprofit. And that really became clear to her when she started following Nick Kristof and seeing that Nick Kristof really cared about this idea of global education. He had his own kid doing a gap year in China. And so she started to move down the engagement ladder with Nick Kristof. First she started liking his content, then she started resharing it, then she started actually talking to him directly on Twitter. 4 years later, this relationship has extended well beyond the platform. She's done 2 op-eds in the New York Times, and he's a huge supporter of the organization. It's a powerful, powerful example of how, when you think about reaching out to influencers, influential people or influential brands, you can take your organization to a place you weren't before. Another example, this is a nonprofit media company in Haiti called Fireside International. They were starting an English language learning lab in their organization outside Port-au-Prince. And they decided that they really needed to make this English learning lab work some licenses for Rosetta Stone. Unfortunately, they looked it up, and it would cost them $18,000 to get all the licenses they needed. They did not have that money. And so instead, their founder turned to Twitter, where he reached out to Rosetta Stone. Rosetta Stone ended up partnering with them, sponsoring the licenses they needed, and developing this relationship that extended beyond the platform, that worked to help elevate this nonprofit to a new place. And this is really important. Social media is a way for you to reach people you haven't reached before. And so remembering that on a lot of these platforms, reaching people is about reaching people who can help support you just as much as it is about reaching people who can be in your movement is really important. So the final step in this share model is about excellence. And I like to talk about excellence, particularly when it comes to this idea of pivoting. I mentioned Scott Williams earlier, who years ago had this hashtag asking people where they were going to church on Sundays. He then, after a couple years of that, pivoted to start using Periscope, one of those live streaming apps, and he became huge on Periscope, where he would talk about his work on that platform. This year, one of the biggest pivots for churches has been Facebook Live. Churches all over the country, all over the world, are using Facebook Live to great effect, realizing how well it is bringing in people who can't be in the building. And it's really exemplifying social media at its best, right? Creating connection when connection wasn't there before. Another part of excellence, though, is knowing how to get back from mistakes, right? One of my favorite examples of all time comes from the American Red Cross, the esteemed American Red Cross, and their sad drunken tweet episode. So the American Red Cross does this thing that many organizations do, where they manage their social media using one of those platforms that allows you to have multiple accounts in one place, right? And so one of the big problems of these platforms is that you've got to make sure you're in the right place, tweeting on the right Facebook page, or posting on the right Instagram profile, or tweeting on the right Twitter profile. And that's exactly what happened here. This is Gloria Huang. She was a social media manager for the American Red Cross. In the top left-hand corner, she gets on the American Red Cross account. At the time, they had 500,000 followers, and she tweets out, it's a Friday afternoon, Ryan found 2 more 4-bottle packs of Dogfish Head's Midas Touch beer. When we drink, we do it right, getting slizzard. This is a nightmare. This is the American Red Cross. This isn't some tiny nonprofit next door. This is huge. The blogs went wild. They said, how can the American Red Cross ever claw themselves back from this? This is a PR nightmare. You know what they did? They didn't hide it. And there have been many, many companies that have hidden it. There's another famous one where Chrysler, a guy gets on the Chrysler account, the social media manager, and tweets out a swear word about how no one can drive in Detroit, right? So, but then what did Chrysler do? They just deleted it, pretend it didn't happen, right? That's not what the Red Cross did. The Red Cross owned it. She gets on her own account. She says, rogue tweet from @RedCross, due to my inability to use Hootsuite, one of those social media curators. I wasn't actually getting slizzard, but just excited, now embarrassing. Now they go back to the main account. We've deleted the rogue tweet, but rest assured the Red Cross is sober and we've confiscated the keys. This was well done, right? This is owning up to a mistake, being authentic about it, engaging with your followers, and creating community around mistakes that we all make, right? This is a wonderful example of what it means to truly find excellence in the midst of, a fuzzy, challenging social media world. So today, we've talked about kind of this big picture. We've talked about what has happened to social media in the last year, why everyone thinks social media is so bad, and then we've tried to bring it down to this model of how you, as do-gooders, and I say that with reverence, you as do-gooders can use social media to make powerful, positive change for your organizations and in the lives of your people. And I want to end with a story from a little place called Point Hope, Alaska. This is Point Hope, Alaska. Just looking at it, you probably don't need me to tell you that it is one of the most remote towns in North America. And Point Hope, Alaska has this interesting thing happening right now as we speak. Because the ice caps are melting, they are going to get the fastest internet in North America in the next couple months. They've had pretty bad internet until now, for obvious reasons. Look where they're located. But there's going to do some magic with fiber optic cables. I don't really understand it. It's going to go through the ocean. And it's all going to be incredibly, incredibly fast. They're going to have the highest speed internet in North America. So last month, a New York Times journalist goes up to Point Hope, Alaska, and starts talking to people. The mayor says no one really knows who we are, but now they're going to know, because now we're going to be on the map. We're going to be on the internet. And the journalist keeps talking to people. And what she hears again and again is a lot of fear. and a lot of concern. There are a couple people saying good things. You know, one woman says, oh, I'm excited because this will create opportunities for distance learning for my children. But a lot of people have heard a lot of bad things about social media, and they're very, very worried for their adolescence, and they're very, very worried for their culture. These are valid concerns. At the end of the article, the journalist goes to a small Lutheran church in Point Hope, Alaska. And there are a dozen people doing a rehearsal of a native dancing and drumming ceremony. And so the obvious question, you know, in an article about what is the internet going to do to Point Hope, Alaska is, what will the internet, what will social media specifically do to this culture, right? And so the journalist is there, and she's watching 12 people, no more than 12 people in this tiny church in this dancing and drumming ceremony. And she's thinking, wow, you know, this is beautiful. How will this change? And then she sees someone in the corner with a phone. And this person's got the phone in the corner. They're holding it up. And the gal goes, make sure you get this. Because I guess someone else is helping her film. She's live streaming at this very moment that the journalist is watching the entire rehearsal to a large Facebook page that she has created for this particular type of drumming and dancing for all Northern Alaskans. And it's just this incredible moment, right? Only in Point Hope, Alaska would you see this happen, and only in Point Hope, Alaska could we see such incredible hope for the future. In that moment, those 12 people in that tiny church are broadcasting what they're doing, and not just broadcasting in a compare and despair way, but creating engagement, creating community where there wasn't community before. So even in Point Hope, Alaska, you can connect with the world. If that's not hope, I don't know what is. Thank you.
Come on, give it up for Claire. Wasn't that amazing?
Do another selfie. We got another one. Oh, you got to.
She's gonna take a selfie.
Oh yeah, wait. That was good. That was good.
Thank you, Claire. That was fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.